0847 local time, East China Sea, altitude 21,000 feet. A Canadian Air Force CP-140 Aurora patrol aircraft, 4 turboprop engines, 140,000 pounds of aluminum and electronics, is making lazy circles over open water. From the ground, if you could see it at all, it looks like a commercial flight running behind schedule. Inside, 12 crew members are running one of the most technically demanding surveillance missions in the modern military toolkit, and they have no idea that in approximately 4 minutes, a Chinese fighter jet is going to try to kill them. Not metaphorically, not diplomatically, physically. The kind of kill that ends with debris fields and next of kin notifications. This is the story of what happened over the East China Sea. What the cameras captured, what the sensors recorded, what the Chinese pilots thought they were accomplishing, and what they were actually handing to Western intelligence services on a silver platter. By the end of this flight, Canada's crew would have cataloged more classified data on China's most advanced fighter jet than most spy satellites gather in a year. Beijing's intimidation campaign had one small design flaw. The plane they were trying to intimidate was specifically built to steal secrets from people trying to intimidate it. To understand why Canada was there, you need to understand what the Aurora actually does for a living. On paper, it's a maritime patrol aircraft, designed to hunt submarines, track surface ships, and monitor ocean approaches. In practice, it's one of the most versatile intelligence-gathering platforms in the Western Alliance's inventory, and it has a job that nobody much advertises: enforcing United Nations sanctions against North Korea. North Korea's regime has a problem. It wants money, lots of it. Specifically, it wants the hard currency that flows from selling coal, iron, seafood, and weapons to countries that agreed with the rest of the world not to buy them. The UN's sanctions regime is supposed to prevent this. On paper, it does. In practice, there's an entire shadow economy built around circumventing it, and that economy runs primarily at sea. The mechanism is called ship-to-ship transfer, a North Korean vessel carrying sanctioned cargo sales into international waters. A second vessel, flagged to a country that will ask no questions, pulls alongside. Cargo changes hands in the middle of the ocean, far from port authorities and customs inspectors. The North Korean ship returns empty. The other ship continues to port with goods that are now laundered of their origin. The whole operation takes a few hours and happens, conservatively, hundreds of times a year. The Aurora's job is to document it, not stop it. That's above the patrol aircraft's pay grade. Document it. Hull numbers, cargo manifests, transfer quantities, GPS coordinates, timestamps. Enough evidence that the UN Enforcement Coordination Cell can name names and sanction actors. It's painstaking, unglamorous work that mostly appears in footnotes of diplomatic cables, until the morning a Chinese J-16 shows up and turns a sanctions monitoring flight into an international incident. At 0847, the contact appeared on scope, bearing 047, 12 nautical miles out, a vessel sitting noticeably low in the water, yet which in naval surveillance language means her tanks are full. She's been loaded recently. Her automatic identification system was switched off, which is the maritime equivalent of driving down a highway with your license plate removed. It announces to anyone watching that this ship does not want to be tracked. The profile matched 3 vessels on the UN watch list. The Aurora descended from 21,000 feet toward 15,000, trading altitude for camera angle. The M620 electro-optical turret, a targeting system originally developed for military helicopters, mounted under the Aurora's nose, slewed toward the contact and locked on. It's capable of reading hull markings from 5 miles away. What it showed the crew was that the name painted on the vessel's stern had been repainted recently. The new paint was a slightly different shade than the surrounding hull. Someone had changed this ship's identity within the last few weeks. The infrared feed showed heat blooming from the engine room, consistent with a ship that had been running hard to make a rendezvous on schedule. Alongside her, a second vessel was already in position. Deck cranes were moving. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Then the electronic warfare display lit up. The warning came in the form of a radar spike, sharp, focused, and moving fast on the bearing display. Not a search radar sweeping in lazy arcs the way commercial vessels and weather systems do. This was a fire control radar. The difference matters enormously. A search radar is looking for things. A fire control radar has already found something. It's measuring it, calculating a firing, calculating a just solution. Someone 12 miles away had just pointed a loaded weapon at the Aurora. They hadn't fired, but they were aiming. The co-pilot found it visually at 11 o'clock, a dark shape dropping out of the morning haze to the northwest. Twin engine trails, swept wings, climbing turn that resolved into a descending attack profile as it closed the distance. The aircraft was accelerating, not decelerating. Fighter pilots who intend a polite visual inspection slow down as they approach. This one was speeding up. It crossed the Aurora's nose at 400 feet. At their combined closure rate of approximately 900 miles per hour, the Aurora doing 280 knots, the fighter doing somewhere north of 500, 400 feet of separation represents about half a second between a near miss and a mid-air collision. The pilots had no time to react. The Chinese pilot had calculated this precisely. The point wasn't to hit them. The point was to make sure they understood how easily it could have gone the other way. The wake turbulence arrived 3 seconds later, invisible rolling vortices of air off the fighter's wingtips that hit the Aurora like a wall. The autopilot disconnected automatically, as designed. The aircraft rolled 15 degrees left. In the cargo bay, a sensor operator's coffee mug became a projectile. The pilots hauled the aircraft back to level flight through sheer grip, 140,000 pounds of patrol plane, suddenly reminding everyone aboard how much it weighs when it's not cooperating. By the time they had it stable, the fighter was already turning back. The aircraft was a Shenyang J-16, and before we go any further into what happened next, it's worth spending a moment on what China actually sent to do this job, because the choice tells you something about Beijing's intentions. The J-16 is China's most capable multi-role fighter. Its lineage traces back through a chain of acquisitions and reverse engineering that started when the Soviet Union gave China access to the Su-27 airframe in 1992. China studied it, copied it, and produced the J-11. Then they took the Su-30, a two-seat strike variant, and produced the J-16, adding their own avionics, radar systems, and weapons. The result is a large, powerful twin-engine fighter with a combat radius of around 1,500 kilometers, the ability to carry a significant weapons load, and genuinely capable electronics. The radar, a Type 1475 AESA array with over 1,200 individual transmitter modules, is the most important piece of equipment on the aircraft for our purposes. AESA stands for Active Electronically Scanned Array. The traditional way to describe it is advanced radar. The better way to describe it is a system that can simultaneously track dozens of targets, jam communications, act as a data link, and guide missiles to multiple targets, all while making it extremely difficult for the target to detect what the radar is doing. Modern Western militaries have spent billions of dollars trying to understand exactly how China's AESA performs. Its pulse patterns, its frequency agility, the way it manages beam steering in a tight dogfight. The J-16 pilot who lit his radar and pointed it at the Aurora had just started broadcasting all of that live to the aircraft he was trying to intimidate. Because here's the thing about the Aurora that Beijing either didn't know or didn't respect. Those blisters and bulges along the fuselage aren't aerodynamic features, they're antennas. The CP-140 carries the AN/ALQ507 Electronic Support Measures Suite, a passive signals intelligence system that does for radar emissions what a high-end microphone does for a whispered conversation in a crowded room. The moment a radar hits the Aurora, the system begins cataloging it: frequencies, pulse widths, repetition intervals, beam characteristics, power output, the subtle harmonic signatures that reveal how the radar was manufactured and how it handles stress. By the time the J-16 finished its first pass, Canada had a more complete electronic profile of China's most advanced fighter radar than most NATO intelligence assessments had on file. And the Chinese pilot was just getting started. The fighter eased into formation 300 feet off the Aurora's left wing. From there, the crew could count rivets. They could see the pilot's oxygen mask move as he keyed his radio. The transmission came in slightly accented English, the language of international aviation, the one both aircraft were required by international law to use. Canadian aircraft, you are approaching Chinese territorial airspace. Turn around immediately. It was a lie, and everyone on the frequency knew it. The Aurora was operating in international airspace, the East China Sea beyond the 12 nautical mile territorial limit that China, like every other coastal nation, is entitled to under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. China has made expansive territorial claims in the South and East China Seas that go well beyond what international law recognizes. But making a claim and having it recognized are different things, and Canadian military aircraft operate according to the law as written, not as Beijing wishes it were written. The captain's response was measured, deliberate, and precise. I am a Canadian aircraft operating in international airspace, carrying out the duties of all nations. 10 words. No aggression, no profanity, no challenge. Just the legal and factual reality of the situation, stated calmly over an open frequency that multiple military monitoring stations were recording in real time. The phrase, duties of all nations, is not an accident. It's a reference to the UN Security Council resolutions, authorizing the sanctions enforcement mission the Aurora was conducting. In those 10 words, the captain had managed to simultaneously assert Canada's legal right to be there, invoke the international mandate authorizing the mission, and signal to every other party listening that whatever happened next was being documented. The J-16 pilot didn't respond. He held formation and kept his radar locked. He probably thought the silence meant he was winning. What followed was a masterclass in Chinese aerial harassment doctrine, a playbook Beijing has refined over years of encounters with American, Australian, Japanese, and now Canadian aircraft. The goal isn't to shoot anyone down, it's to make the experience unpleasant enough and frightening enough that crews start turning around before they've completed their missions. Every kilometer of airspace the Aurora voluntarily vacated would be a small victory. Every time a Western crew broke off early would make the next crew more hesitant. The strategy is calibrated, patient, and designed to work across years, not minutes. The first maneuver was the cut. The J-16 surged forward along the Aurora's flight path, then hauled hard across their nose. 200 feet of clearance at combined speeds that made 200 feet feel like standing in a doorway while a bus passed. The Aurora flew through the fighter's jet wash. Superheated exhaust off twin WS-10B turbofans, running at partial afterburner, still hot enough to measure in 4 figures. The Aurora bucked. The number 3 engine coughed as disrupted airflow momentarily starved the compressor intake. The aircraft dropped 200 feet in the resulting turbulence before the pilots caught it and clawed back to altitude. First damage assessment. All engines normal, no permanent harm. But the margin had been close, another few seconds of engine starvation, and they'd have been managing a restart mid-flight while a hostile fighter watched. What the Chinese pilot did not understand was that his throttle response during that cut, the exact acceleration curve of the WS-10B engines from cruise to partial afterburner, had just been logged in Canadian databases. Chinese engineers had spent years guarding the specific performance characteristics of those engines. The AN/ALQ507 had just measured them at close range while the pilot showed off. The fighter climbed 500 feet above them and rolled inverted. The J-16 hung upside down for 3 full seconds, the pilot staring down through his canopy at the Canadians below. It was a piece of theater. The aircraft's fly-by-wire system and thrust vectoring holding 50,000 pounds of fighter in a sustained inverted position that older jets couldn't have managed. Then it completed a lazy barrel roll around the Aurora's fuselage, passing close enough over the tail that the rear observer could see the pilot's head turning to track them. The crew noted the roll rate, the time to complete 360 degrees of rotation at that airspeed, the specific behavior of the control surfaces during the maneuver. Performance data that would normally require years of satellite monitoring and signals intelligence to piece together was streaming to Five Eyes analytical centers via encrypted satellite uplink. The fighter settled back, into formation and rocked its wings. Left, right, left. The international signal for "Follow me." The Aurora maintained heading 095. The J-16 rocked its wings again, more aggressively. The subtext was obvious. Turn around or this gets worse. The Canadians decided to find out what worse looked like. 37 minutes into the encounter, the first J-16 broke off and climbed away to the northwest. The crew allowed themselves one collective exhale. They'd held the line. The mission clock was still running. Below them, the MX-20 had captured everything. The ship-to-ship transfer was nearly complete, and they had high-definition footage of both vessels, hull markings, deck configurations, and crane activity. The day's primary mission was essentially accomplished. Then a new radar contact appeared on scope, bearing 270, altitude 30,000 feet, speed, fast, descending. The second aircraft was using the morning sun, approaching from the west, keeping the glare directly behind it to mask the visual approach for as long as possible. It's the oldest fighter tactic in aviation, dating to World War I when pilots learned to attack out of the sun. The fact that a supposedly modern Air Force still relies on it says something about how basic the underlying instinct is. Find a blind spot, exploit it, make the other person react instead of think. As the fighter resolved through the haze, the crew noticed the difference immediately. Same J-16 airframe, same swept wings, same twin engine configuration, same flanker-derived fuselage. But the pylons under its wings were not empty. 4 PL-15 air-to-air missiles, 2 on each inboard station, their seeker heads clearly visible against the fighter's gray paint. The PL-15 is China's answer to the American AIM-120, AMRAAM, a beyond visual range radar-guided missile with an estimated range of 200 kilometers, and an active seeker that allows it to hunt its target independently after launch. In Chinese government press releases, it's described as a world-class weapon that will defeat any Western counterpart. In Western intelligence assessments, it's described more cautiously as a capable system whose real-world performance in actual combat remains unproven. The first J-16 had come to make a point. This one came to make a threat. The second fighter didn't bother with radio calls. No claims about territorial airspace. No demands to turn around. It crossed the Aurora's nose at 300 feet, closer than the first had managed, and immediately hauled into a 7G turn. In 6 seconds, 50,000 pounds of fighter had reversed direction and was now approaching from the Aurora's 6 o'clock, behind them, climbing through their altitude from below. At the apex of the climb, inverted 200 feet directly above the patrol aircraft, the J-16 pilot looked straight down through his canopy. Then he completed the roll. A perfect barrel roll that traced a cylinder in the sky with the Aurora at its center, and as he passed, over the tail, the gap narrowed to 100 feet. As he rolled out on their right side, he deliberately rocked the aircraft. 4 missiles, all visible, all armed. The crew continued filming. The MX-20 captured the weapons load in high definition. Pylon attachment points, missile body configurations, seeker head geometry, the exact loadout pattern that would tell Allied analysts how the J-16 configures for an intercept mission versus an air superiority sweep. In intelligence terms, a photograph of an adversary aircraft's weapons loadout in an operational context is worth more than 100 satellite images of the jet sitting on a runway. You can figure out what a country owns from satellite photos. You can only figure out what they intend to use from watching them actually arm up and go flying. The second fighter slid into close formation off the Aurora's right wing, 130 feet out, matching their speed precisely. Then it started creeping closer. 130 feet. 100 feet. 80 feet. At 80 feet of wingtip to wingtip separation between a fighter jet and a patrol aircraft, you are operating in a regime where the aerodynamics of both aircraft are interacting with each other. The Aurora's wing was beginning to feel the disruption off the J-16's. The pilots were making constant small corrections, feeding in aileron inputs to compensate for the asymmetric lift being generated by having a large aircraft that close on one side. At 60 feet, they were 4 wingspans apart. At 60 feet, a moment of target fixation. The involuntary tendency of pilots under stress to stare at a threat rather than monitor their instruments could mean collision before conscious thought had time to intervene. The crew had trained for exactly this. Back at 14 Wing Greenwood in Nova Scotia, Aurora crews run through hostile intercept scenarios in simulators detailed enough to simulate wake turbulence, radar, lock warnings, and the specific psychological pressure of a fighter hovering at formation distance with its weapons visible. Some instructor had probably been accused of overdoing it when they designed the exercise. On this morning over the East China Sea, they weren't being dramatic. They were being prophetic. The captain's hands were locked on the yoke, every muscle in his forearms holding the aircraft in perfect trim. His job, the entire crew's job, was to give the Chinese pilot nothing. No reaction, no flinch, no aggressive maneuver that could be filmed and replayed in a Beijing press conference as evidence of Western provocation. The J-16 was trying to manufacture an incident. The Aurora was refusing to become one. Then the fighter moved. Afterburners lit. The J-16 surged forward, blue-white cones of flame stretching behind the WS-10Bs, heat distortion blurring the air between the two aircraft. The fighter climbed through their altitude 400 feet ahead. Then it pulled its throttles to idle. In aviation, this is called a brake check. On the highway, it's the move a driver makes when they want to terrorize the semi-truck behind them. Pull into the fast lane, stomp the brakes, and watch the 80,000-pound vehicle behind them try not to become part of the scenery. In the air, the physics are more complicated and the consequences more final. A 4-engine turboprop aircraft carrying 140,000 pounds does not stop on command. The moment the J-16's engines went to idle, the Aurora's closure rate climbed from 0 to 150 knots in approximately 2 seconds. They were eating the distance between them at a rate that left no comfortable math. The captain pulled his own throttles back. 4 Allison turboprops wound down, but turboprops, like all large reciprocating systems, carry significant inertia. You can reduce thrust. You cannot instantly reduce speed. The Aurora continued closing. 400 feet became 300. 300 became 250. The stall warning activated, their airspeed dropping as they tried to bleed energy, the wing approaching the angle at which it would stop generating lift and start generating a very rapid descent. The stick shaker pulsed in the pilot's hands, the aircraft's way of saying you are running out of options. The closure rate calculation was simple and terrible. At their current parameters, impact in 8 seconds. 7. The fighter filled the windscreen. 6. The collision warning added its voice to the stall warning in the cockpit. 2 simultaneous alarms telling the crew 2 contradictory things. Slow down more and stop closing. 5 seconds. The co-pilot's hand moved toward the throttle quadrant, ready. 4. The flight engineer was mentally running engine restart procedures. If they stalled, or if the jet wash from whatever happened next killed an engine, they needed to be back online in seconds, not minutes. 3. The Chinese pilot glanced back through his canopy to see if 20 minutes of escalating aggression had finally cracked their nerve. He saw a Canadian patrol aircraft maintaining heading and altitude, its crew declining to react. 2. The Aurora was not turning, it was not climbing, it was not flinching. The J-16's engines erupted back to life. The fighter accelerated and dove simultaneously, passing beneath the Aurora with 100 feet to spare, which is barely enough clearance between 2 commercial flights at different cruising altitudes, and is approximately nothing when you factor in the turbulence a fighter generates at high thrust settings. The jet wash hit immediately. 1,400-degree exhaust from the WS-10Bs at high power, flowing directly into the Aurora's lower fuselage and then into the engine intakes. The number 4 turboprop compressor stalled, the disrupted air destroying the carefully organized flow of air the engine needed to keep running. The aircraft yawed hard, right as 3 engines pulled and 1 coasted. The pilots corrected with rudder and asymmetric power, fighting to maintain straight flight while 50,000 pounds of Chinese fighter pulled away beneath them. 4 seconds. That's how long a turboprop compressor stall lasts before the engine either relights or commits to a full failure. 4 seconds in which the crew was managing 2 simultaneous emergencies, a yawing, uncontrolled aircraft and a potentially dying engine, while also tracking a hostile fighter somewhere below them. The engine relit, normal parameters. The aircraft stabilized. 9 hours after takeoff, the Aurora landed at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. All 4 engines intact. All 12 crew members uninjured. The surveillance footage of the North Korean ship-to-ship transfer complete. The electronic intelligence gathered on 2 J-16 operating in their intended combat roles. Extraordinary. Let's tabulate what the AN/ALQ-507 came home with, because this is the part of the story that the Chinese pilots definitely didn't brief to their commanders. The Type 1475A ESA radar, China's most advanced, the one Western intelligence services have been trying to characterize for a decade, was transmitting for approximately 47 continuous minutes, while the Aurora's sensors logged every emission. They captured the radar's operating frequencies, its pulse patterns, its frequency hopping behavior under electronic attack, the way its beam narrows during track mode versus search mode, and the subtle drift characteristics that reveal how the system manages heat across the transmitter array. Every one of those parameters is a piece of the puzzle that tells you how to defeat the radar in combat, what frequency your jammer should target, where the blind spots are, how the system reacts when it thinks it's being jammed. The WS-10B engine performance data? captured during multiple afterburner cycles, a sustained barrel roll, a near-vertical climb, and a combat simulation dive, gave Western analysts a real-world performance model of China's domestic turbofan engine that no amount of satellite imagery could have provided. Engine performance data tells you the fighter's sustained turn rate, its energy management in a dogfight, how long it can maintain afterburner before fuel forces a throttle reduction. You cannot find this in a Chinese military press release. You can find it if you follow a J-16 around for 47 minutes while it performs for you. The PL-15 weapons loadout, photographed in high definition from 130 feet, gave analysts the exact physical configuration of China's premier air-to-air missile in a live intercept configuration. Not a mock-up on a static display at an air show. A real weapon, armed, on an aircraft that had just demonstrated exactly how it approaches an engagement. Within 24 hours of landing, this data was in the hands of every intelligence service in the Five Eyes network. The intelligence-sharing alliance between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Within a week, it was almost certainly being used to update the electronic warfare profiles loaded onto every Western fighter that might one day face a J-16 in combat. The Chinese Air Force sent 2 of its best aircraft and 2 of its trained pilots to frighten 1 Canadian patrol plane away from a sanctions monitoring mission. What they achieved was a comprehensive intelligence windfall for the alliance they were trying to intimidate. The obvious question is, if China knows these aircraft are collecting intelligence, and they know, why do they keep sending fighters to perform right next to them? Why not simply shadow the Aurora at a safe distance, deny them the close-in emissions data, and avoid creating an international incident? The answer is that from Beijing's perspective, the intelligence leak is an acceptable cost. The strategic goal isn't to protect the J-16's secrets. It's to make Western nations, Canada, Australia, the United States, Japan, gradually conclude that sending aircraft into airspace Beijing considers sensitive is more trouble than it's worth. If the harassment is frequent enough and aggressive enough, and the diplomatic fallout is manageable enough, the calculation goes, eventually Allied commanders will stop authorizing these flights. It has not worked. Canada, Australia, and the United States have all documented Chinese aerial harassment incidents in the past 3 years and responded by continuing their operations. Australia published a detailed account of a Chinese J-16 using chaff, metallic particles designed to blind radar, that was ingested into the engine of an RAAF P-8 Poseidon during a similar surveillance flight, causing damage that could have been catastrophic. The response was to continue the flights. The United States has documented over 300 incidents of unsafe Chinese intercepts since 2021. The response has been to continue the flights and publish the documentation, because here's what Beijing's harassment doctrine misunderstands about Western military culture. The moment you try to bully a democratic military alliance out of international airspace, you have given every member of that alliance a shared grievance, a shared demonstration of your intentions, and a shared reason to push back harder. Every incident that gets published, and they all get published now, is evidence for every defense budget argument, every alliance coordination meeting, every strategic review of China policy. The harassment is building the case for its own countermeasures. There's a detail from this flight that tends to get lost in the technical and strategic analysis. At the moment the J-16's engines cut to idle and the Aurora's collision warning was counting down from 8 seconds, the captain did not maneuver. His hands were on the yoke, and he held heading and altitude, knowing that if the Chinese pilot did not relight his engines, there was not enough time to avoid a collision. He made a judgment, informed by training, by doctrine, by understanding of the political consequences of reacting, that the Aurora's best chance of surviving this encounter with its mission and its crew intact was to refuse to play. That judgment was correct. It was also the kind of judgment that is easy to describe and almost impossible to actually make when a fighter jet is filling your windscreen and the stall warning is screaming in your headset. The Chinese pilots were back on the ground within the hour, probably expecting to have achieved something. A Canadian crew shaken, a mission aborted, a small victory in the long campaign to make Western aircraft think twice about operating in airspace Beijing has decided it owns. Instead, they handed Canada and its allies a detailed technical profile of their most advanced fighter jet, documented evidence of illegal North Korean sanctions violations, and a vivid demonstration of the exact tactics their Air Force uses during intercept missions. The Aurora's mission report, filed that evening at Kadena, ran to several hundred pages, and the next morning Canada sent another aircraft, because that's what the duties of all nations require.